11 seconds of audio, that's all it was. A woman speaking in an empty room, certain nobody could hear her, someone could. And what that person did next didn't just end their own career, it apparently pushed Prince William into a confrontation with his father that has been building since he was 11 years old. This isn't the story you think it is. Start with the claim, because it's narrow and it matters. A report describes a member of household staff, a long-serving aide, a woman in her 40s, passing through a corridor at Kensington Palace during a private meeting earlier this year. A door was open a few inches. Inside, Meghan Markle was on a call. She was talking about Catherine. The aide lifted her phone. That's the whole incident. No confrontation, no witnesses, no scene. A door, a phone, 11 seconds. I want to be honest about the sourcing here before we go anywhere near what was allegedly said. This comes from a single report. Kensington Palace does not comment on private conversations and has not commented on this one. Nobody has published the audio. Nobody has published a transcript. What follows is what the report describes, and I'll flag the parts where it stops being verifiable. Because the interesting thing about this story isn't the recording at all. It's what it landed on top of. Rewind to November 2018, a story broke in the British press claiming Meghan had made Catherine cry during a bridesmaid dress fitting before the royal wedding. It ran everywhere. It ran for years. For millions of people it remains the single most memorable fact about Meghan Markle. Both Harry and Meghan have said it was false. In 2021, Meghan told Oprah the opposite had happened, that Catherine had made her cry and had apologized afterwards with flowers and a handwritten note. Set aside which version you believe, it doesn't matter for what comes next. What matters is what Harry says his brother did when he worked out where the story had come from. In his memoir, Harry recounts William phoning their father. According to that account, William said, "Give Pa and Camilla an inch, they take a mile. They've done this to me for the last time." Then he asked Charles a question. He asked how his father could be letting a stranger do this to his sons. And Charles, per the same account, lost his temper, told William he was paranoid, defended Camilla over his own child. That exchange has never been legally challenged. It sits in a published book, on the record, unretracted. Hold that pattern in your head, because it repeats with almost mechanical precision across 30 years. William raises an alarm. Charles calls him paranoid. Charles chooses Camilla. Nothing happens. And now, if this report is accurate, 2026, what? Which is why the recording, if it exists, represents something William has never once had in his entire adult life. Not gossip, not embarrassment, evidence. So what was on it? According to the report, nothing you'd call a scandal, no slur, no threat, no plot, just Meghan describing Catherine, her manner, her silence, the image she projects, in terms the report characterizes as dismissive, and in one phrase it declines to reproduce, contemptuous. And here I want to stop, because I think most coverage of this is going to skip straight past something important. Every single person watching this has said something about a relative that they would not want played back into a room. Every one. If the standard is a private sentence captured without consent, nobody survives it. Not Meghan, not Catherine, not the aide who pressed record, not you. That's the honest position. It's also, apparently, not the position taken inside Kensington Palace. The report says the file reached William's private secretary within 3 days. It says he listened once, said nothing, asked for it again. And then, this is the detail that keeps pulling me back, before the second playback, he asked for the room to be cleared. Think about why a man does that. Not because he was going to react, because he wasn't. Because whatever moved across his face during those 11 seconds was something he had decided, in advance, that no member of staff would ever be able to describe to a journalist. That is a man who has thought very carefully about what other people are permitted to see. And it explains how he has survived this family. Look at the others. Harry wrote a book. Meghan sat down with Oprah. Charles briefs through friends, and always has. Camilla has run the most effective reputation campaign in modern British history, largely by never being caught running one. William has done none of it, not once. 43 years, no leaked outburst, no confirmed quote, no public loss of composure. The most photographed man in Britain, and there is no footage of him angry. Almost everything we know about what he actually thinks, we know because his brother wrote it down and sold it. Consider what that discipline costs. To be the only non-leaker in a family of leakers. To carry every grievance you've ever had in complete silence while everyone around you monetizes theirs. They're all still in there. Now the part I trust least, and I'll say so plainly. The report describes William arriving at Clarence House unannounced. It says Charles expected a duchy briefing and got his son instead, standing, declining a chair. It says William played the recording, and it says that when it finished, Charles asked what he was supposed to do about a private remark, and William gave him 4 words: get her out. Not out of the family, not out of the country, out of the arrangement, the residual titles, the residual security, the residual protection that has quietly survived around the Sussex despite everything that's happened. Charles refused. Now, that scene has no named source, no confirmed attendees, and reports dialogue between 2 men behind a closed door. Treat it accordingly, but notice what makes it feel true. It isn't the demand, it's the refusal, because that is precisely, unmistakably, what Charles does. Presented with proof that someone has damaged his sons, this king's instinct has never once been to act. It's to counsel patience, to close the folder, to let the consequences arrive later, by post, delivered by someone else. Well, the report says William left without another word. Of course he did. He always does. And here's where I think everyone reading this story is about to misread it. Because that isn't a defeat. Look at what William does when he actually has power. In the 2024 Duchy of Cornwall annual report, the payment to Annabel Elliot, Camilla's sister, an interior designer who had been drawing duchy money for nearly 2 decades, was recorded with a single word: nil. No statement, no press release, no thank you for 20 years of service. He didn't argue with her, he didn't confront her, he removed her from a spreadsheet and let her find out. That is how this man fights, silently, financially, permanently. He does not hand people a scene to react to, he hands them an absence where their income used to be. So when a report claims William demanded action, was refused, and walked out saying nothing, that isn't a man who lost. That's a man who stopped needing permission, because here is the arithmetic nobody wants to say out loud. Charles is 77, he is being treated for cancer. And every arrangement he has protected, every allowance quietly continued, every title he has declined to remove, every act of institutional mercy extended to people William believes destroyed his mother and then came for his wife, exists entirely at the discretion of the reigning monarch. Entirely. There is a version of this story where William lost an argument in his father's drawing room, and there is a version where he simply looked at his father and did the maths and decided the argument had become irrelevant. As for the Aide, the report says she no longer works for the household, not prosecuted, not named, which is convenient because naming her would have required confirming that the recording exists. She hasn't spoken, nobody has produced the audio, and that silence cuts both ways, so let's be adults about it. Either the tape is real and it's being buried, or the tape was never real and this entire account is scaffolding built over 8 years of documented, verifiable family grievance. I don't know which. Neither does anybody outside that building. What I do know is that the grievance is real. The 2018 story is real. Harry's account is published and unchallenged. The word nil sits in the public accounts of the Duchy of Cornwall, where a woman's salary used to be. The recording may or may not exist. The rage does. There's one more thing worth saying, and it isn't about William at all. Consider the position Catherine occupies in this. She has said nothing. She was not in that corridor. She has never, in 14 years of public life, responded to a single word written about her by anyone. And she has never needed to. That's the thing that people who study this family eventually noticed. Catherine has never once defended herself, and she has never once had to, because somebody else always does it for her. In 2018 it was William phoning Charles. In 2026, if this account holds, it was William standing in a drawing room refusing a chair. She doesn't ask, she has never asked. Which makes her, structurally, the most protected person in Britain, and the only member of this family who has gained everything without ever visibly wanting any of it. Camilla spent 30 years asking, Meghan spent 5 years explaining. Catherine has spent 14 years saying nothing, and her husband has spent them saying it for her. And that's the thing outsiders never grasp about this family. The scandals are never the story. The tampon transcript wasn't the story. The bridesmaid dresses weren't the story. 11 seconds of audio from a corridor isn't the story either. The story is a boy who was 11 when he read in a newspaper what his father had said to another man's wife, who was 15 when he walked behind his mother's coffin through central London while 2 billion people watched and did not cry, who has spent every year since being told he was paranoid, emotional, overreacting, that he should let it go. He never let go of anything. He was just waiting for the accounts. If all new here, hit subscribe, because whatever happens next doesn't depend on a recording. It depends on how much time Charles has left.
Something just resurfaced this week that reframes almost every major story about Meghan Markle from the past year. And it is not a rumor. It is not speculation from a tabloid. It is a documented set of internal briefing notes tied to a real communications operation that was obtained and reported on in April, and that explains in black and white exactly how her team has been managing the narrative around her brand, her relationships, and her public image. Once you read what is actually in those documents, a lot of things that previously seemed like coincidences start to look like something else entirely. Here is where this starts. In April of this year, ahead of Harry and Meghan's tour of Australia, a set of documents described as operational planning notes were obtained and reported on by multiple outlets covering the trip. These were not anonymous tips or unnamed sources making claims. These were documents with a clear origin, tied to the Sussex's communications team, and they laid out a specific strategy in specific language. The notes described a carefully calibrated communications approach designed to counter accusations that the trip was self-promotional. They outlined pre-scripted responses to anticipated criticism. They described messaging priorities intended to control how the visit was covered from the moment the couple landed. Now, that context matters enormously for everything that has happened around Meghan's brand over the past several months, because that same disciplined, pre-planned approach to narrative management does not switch off between major trips. It is a permanent operating mode. And the evidence for that is sitting in plain sight across a string of stories that each looked unrelated when they first appeared. Start with the As Ever and Netflix split in March. Both sides released statements the same day. Both statements used near identical language. Netflix said the partnership was always intended to lead to independence. Meghan's team said the brand was grateful for the collaboration and ready to stand on its own. Two separate organizations, two separate PR teams, one coordinated message released simultaneously. That is not how two parties accidentally describe the same situation in the same words on the same day. That is a negotiated statement, drafted together, timed together, and released to land as quietly as possible on a Friday morning news cycle. Compare that to how the brand expert community has been describing Meghan's overall communications pattern this year. A former DKNY PR director and brand strategist, speaking to a media industry publication this month, described Markle's current approach as generating momentum without direction. She noted that the communications operation, and she used the specific phrase that it was now on its 11th publicist, understands that controversy and anticipation generate identical search behavior. It does not matter whether the story circulating is positive or critical. Both produce the same outcome in terms of search volume and media coverage. The strategy, as described, is built around creating a spike, not around building durable, sustained interest. That framing, controversy, and anticipation generating identical search behavior is worth sitting with for a moment. It means the communications operation is not optimizing for positive coverage, it is optimizing for search volume. The goal is not for people to think well of Meghan Markle. The goal is for people to search her name, click on the brand, open the store. And for the first year of As Ever, the data suggests that worked. Products sold out in minutes. Traffic hit 268,000 monthly visits by January. Instagram posts generated immediate sellout moments. The strategy was producing the metric it was designed to produce. The web traffic data released this week makes that pattern visible in numbers. When As Ever launched in April 2025, the site recorded enormous traffic. Products sold out in minutes. Coverage was everywhere. Then, according to similar web data reviewed by Newsweek this week, traffic fell 46% in the first 6 months of 2026. January to June, 268,000 visits down to 145,000. Each major announcement, the bookmark collaboration, the wine range expansion, the Australia trip speculation, generates a short spike followed by a return to the declining baseline. A separate analysis found that website visits had dropped from 108,000 in December to 61,500 by April for US visitors specifically, which matters because the US is currently the only market As Ever ships to. Spike, drop, spike, drop. That is the pattern the data shows. And that is consistent with a communications strategy built around generating media moments rather than building sustainable commercial interest. Now look at the Australia trip itself through the same lens. The leaked operational planning notes described the messaging as designed to counter criticism before it arrived publicly, not to respond to it after. That is a significant distinction. Preemptive counter-messaging means the communications team anticipates exactly what the negative story will be, drafts a response to it, and deploys that response at the moment of the announcement so that the critical framing and the rebuttal arrive in the press cycle simultaneously. That technique was documented in the April briefing notes, but it is the same technique visible in March's Netflix split statement, where both parties' language anticipated and preempted the obvious negative reading of the story before any outlet had published one. It is also the same technique visible in the trademark story, where Meghan's team downplayed the Australia registration as speculative at the exact moment the filing itself was available in public patent records. The children's name story from April is perhaps the clearest example of this pattern in action this year. Multiple outlets reported simultaneously that Meghan and Harry had filed to trademark Archie and Lilibet's names. The story spread across entertainment media within hours. Then, less than 24 hours later, a follow-up citing People magazine stated that no such filing had been made. Two completely opposite claims, both attributed to sources close to the situation, less than a day apart. What the correction accomplished was to generate two separate rounds of coverage from one non-event. The original claim produced one wave of attention, the denial produced a second wave, and the net result was that Meghan's name dominated entertainment headlines for a 48-hour cycle based entirely on something that ultimately turned out not to have happened. Whether that cycle was engineered deliberately or happened accidentally is something only the people inside the operation know. But it produced the same outcome as the Australia documents described as the goal: sustained search volume and media presence, regardless of whether the underlying story was positive or negative. What the April planning notes revealed that was genuinely new was the explicit acknowledgement that the communications strategy was designed around perception management in a Commonwealth country where Charles remains head of state. The notes described an attempt to distance the visit from taxpayer funding. They outlined pre-scripted responses. They acknowledged that the optics of the trip would be challenged and prepared messaging to address that before the challenge arrived publicly. That is a sophisticated operation. It is also an operation that leaves paper trails, and in April, one of those trails became public. Meghan's personal absence from the As Ever Instagram since June 12th is the most recent visible data point in this same pattern, because it is the moment when the usual mechanism appears to have paused. The standard playbook, according to the brand expert analysis, involves a regular cycle of strategic content release, controlled media moments, and a spike in coverage followed by a decline until the next moment. Since June 12th, that cycle has visibly stalled. The brand account is still posting. The products are still listed, but the face of the brand, the person the communication strategy has always centered on, went quiet more than 6 weeks ago, and nothing that has come out of her team since then has explained why. And there is one more documented data point from this week that fits directly into this same frame. According to reporting from Radar Online, Netflix did not merely exit its equity stake in As Ever in March, it subsequently returned all remaining As Ever inventory to the brand. Not just the investment, the physical product. That is a detail that neither the Netflix statement nor the As Ever statement from March mentioned, and it did not surface publicly until this week, more than 4 months after the split was announced. The gap between when the split happened and when that specific detail became known is itself an example of the same communication pattern, releasing the manageable part of the story publicly, while the more revealing detail sits unreported until a separate outlet surfaces it months later. That silence, after a year of very deliberate, very documented, very data-visible communications activity, is the part of this story that does not yet have a clean answer. The April documents told us what the strategy looks like when it is running. The traffic data from this week tells us what it looks like when it is producing diminishing returns, and the 6 weeks of absence from the brand's own content tells us something shifted in the last month and a half. What it shifted toward, and what comes next, is the open question sitting underneath all of it right now. What makes the April planning documents so significant in retrospect is that they are the first time the machinery behind this communications operation became visible as a document rather than as an inferred pattern. Up until that point, observers could describe the approach, note the timing of statements, track the media spikes, and point to the coordinated language. But they could not point to a file. The April documents changed that. And they changed it at a moment when the traffic data, the YouGov polling, the Netflix inventory return, and the 6-week social media absence are all telling the same story from different angles at the same time. What the operational planning notes showed is that the strategy exists, is deliberate, and is designed explicitly around managing perception in advance of criticism. What the numbers released this week show is that the same strategy, executed consistently for over a year, has not arrested the underlying decline in the commercial metrics it was ultimately supposed to protect. Those two things existing simultaneously, a sophisticated documented communications operation and a 46% traffic drop in the brand it was built to support, is the story that will be examined long after this particular news cycle moves on. Something has gone very quiet around Meghan Markle's lifestyle brand this week, and the timing of that silence is the part nobody is talking about, because the numbers that just dropped are not the kind of numbers a brand posts a cheerful Instagram about. And here's what makes this story different from every other round of Sussex criticism that cycles through every few weeks. This one comes with data. Hard, verifiable, third-party data. And it landed just days ago. Here's what we know right now. According to web analytics pulled from SimilarWeb and reviewed by Newsweek this week, traffic to the As Ever website has fallen 46% in the first 6 months of 2026 alone. Not over a year, not gradually over 2 years, in 6 months. In January, the site recorded 268,000 visits. By June, that number had dropped to 145,000. That is 123,000 fewer people per month walking through the digital door of a brand that launched just over a year ago and was described at the time as selling out in minutes. But that headline number is not even the most important figure in the data. It's the American number, because As Ever currently only ships within the United States. That is the only market that actually turns into a sale. And US visitors specifically dropped from 108,000 in December to 61,500 by April. That is nearly a 43% drop in the one geographic audience that can actually buy the product. Every other visitor is just a number on a chart that goes nowhere. And that decline is not spread evenly across the year either. The sharpest drop happened between January and April, the exact window in which Netflix confirmed it was exiting the As Ever equity stake, and the show cancellation became public. Traffic went from 268,000 in January to 178,000 by April, before dropping again to 145,000 by June. The floor keeps moving lower, and each small recovery, including a modest bounce in March when the brand released new products, failed to hold. The brand's own data is tracing the arc of a launch moment fading in real time. Now layer that against something else that just surfaced this week. Radar Online reported that Netflix, which had been an equity partner in As Ever before pulling out of that stake in March, has since returned all remaining As Ever inventory to the brand. Let that land for a second. Netflix is not just no longer invested in the brand. Netflix physically sent the products back. That is not the behavior of a company that parted ways on friendly terms and wished the brand well. That is a company clearing the relationship out of its systems entirely. To understand how we got here this fast, you have to go back to the launch, because the gap between where this brand started and where it sits right now is genuinely significant. As Ever launched in April 2025 alongside Meghan's Netflix series With Love, Meghan, the first product drop sold out within minutes. The site was flooded, coverage was everywhere. A Netflix co-CEO described the brand at the time as consistently selling out in record time and praised Meghan's vision for elevating everyday moments. Netflix didn't just broadcast her show. It took an equity stake in the brand itself, putting real money behind the bet that this could be something durable. That was less than 15 months ago. What followed was a slow unraveling that became impossible to ignore by March of this year. With Love, Meghan did not get renewed for a third season. The viewership numbers for the second season came in at roughly 2 million views, a fraction of the 64 million viewing hours the first Harry and Meghan documentary generated in 2022. An industry source told Page 6 at the time simply that her show did not go on. Within days of that news settling, Netflix confirmed it was exiting its equity position in As Ever entirely. Both sides put out matching statements that used phrases like meaningful growth and always intended to be independent. But those statements landed against the backdrop of a streaming company quietly walking away from a financial stake it had taken less than a year before. A brand marketing expert who spoke to a media insider publication this month put the situation in blunter terms than either press release did. Aliza Licht, a former DKNY PR director and brand strategist, said the runway for As Ever is very short, adding that there is no demand for it in the way a sustainable consumer brand requires. She described the influencer pivot Meghan's team has attempted in recent months, paying creators to post about the products, as a symptom of a deeper problem rather than a solution to one. And she noted that every strategic shift the brand has made, the Hollywood Friends launch, the solo content push, the Netflix show as a marketing engine, and now the paid influencer layer, points toward an ending rather than a recovery. There is one more detail from this week that may be the most telling of all. The last video Meghan personally posted on the As Ever Instagram account was on June 12th. That was over 6 weeks ago. Since then, the brand's social accounts have continued posting, but the posts are styled lifestyle imagery featuring products without her. No Meghan, no personality driving the content, just aesthetic photographs of breakfast spreads and candles. For a brand that was built entirely around her identity and her presence, that absence is not a minor gap in the content calendar. It is the main face of the brand going dark at exactly the moment the traffic numbers are showing their sharpest decline. That same publication also noted something about the influencer pivot Meghan's team has attempted in recent months. Rather than Meghan herself driving the content, the brand has begun paying outside creators to post about As Ever products. That is a standard industry move for brands trying to extend their reach beyond an organic audience. But for a brand that was explicitly built around a single personality, outsourcing the storytelling to paid influencers creates a visible gap between the brand's founding premise and its current execution. People followed As Ever because of Meghan. Paid influencers cannot substitute for the founder going quiet on her own platform, and the engagement data from those paid posts suggest the conversion rate from influencer content to actual site traffic has not arrested the overall decline. YouGov polling data from the first quarter of this year adds another dimension to what the web traffic numbers show. Meghan's favorability rating among Americans dropped from a net positive of 15 in Q3 of last year to a net positive of just 2 by Q1 2026. That is a 13-point fall in 2 quarters in the country that is currently her only market. The brand's traffic figures and her personal popularity figures are moving in the same direction at the same time. Newsweek, which reported on both sets of data, noted carefully that correlation does not imply causation, but the overlap is hard to separate out cleanly because As Ever was always a personality-driven brand. When the personality's approval rating falls, the brand built on that personality does not operate in a separate bubble. What does all of this mean for what comes next? The honest answer is that nobody outside the brand's inner circle knows, and even the brand's social output over the last 6 weeks suggests that whatever the next chapter looks like, it has not been announced yet. There is reportedly a cookbook in development tied to recipes from the Netflix series. There have been signals about international expansion, with a trademark registered in Australia covering a wider range of categories than the US filing currently covers. The UK leather bookmark collaboration in January sold out quickly and pointed toward a possible British market push, but none of those things are the same as a structural plan for reversing a 46% traffic decline in the brand's core and only current market. The launch moment is the context for everything. In April 2025, the site was overwhelmed. Products were gone in minutes. Netflix was an equity partner with money in the game. A co-CEO was publicly calling the launch a sign of the partnership's strength. 15 months later, the equity partner has sent the inventory back. The traffic is down nearly half. The show that drove that traffic has been cancelled, and the founder has not appeared on the brand's own social media in 6 weeks. That is the gap between where this started and where it sits this week. And nothing either company's carefully worded March statement said actually explains that distance. What the data points to, taken together, is a brand that ran on launch momentum for about 12 months and is now in a different and harder phase that no PR statement can substitute for. The sellout minutes that defined the first drop required novelty, the collective curiosity of millions of people who wanted to see what Meghan Markle's lifestyle brand actually looked like. That curiosity does not refresh automatically. It has to be replaced with something else: repeat purchase behavior, genuine product loyalty, a broadened customer base, international expansion, or a new media moment big enough to reset the awareness cycle. None of those things have visibly materialized yet. The cookbook is reportedly in development. The Australia trademark hints at international ambitions, but development is not delivery, and hints are not a new product drop that refills the top of the traffic funnel. The brand expert's phrase, "very short runway," is the one that will sit with observers past this week's data cycle. Because a 46% traffic decline in 6 months in the only market you ship to, following the cancellation of the TV show that launched the brand and the exit of the equity partner who invested in it, is not a situation that resolves itself with a few aesthetic Instagram posts. It is a situation that requires a structural response. Whether Meghan's team has that response ready, and whether it lands before the traffic numbers fall further, is the story that is actually still developing right now.